Right, so King Charles has called for mutual respect and unity following the riots across the country. He spoke out for the first time since the unrest began. The King also thanked police for their efforts to restore peace as well as the communities who came out to counter the violence. And all of this comes after the Prime Minister told forces up and down the country to remain on high alert going into the weekend. So GBNews' national reporter Charlie Peters is live from Reform UK's headquarters. What's happening there, Charlie?
Good afternoon, Nana. Well, a significant protest has gathered here, hundreds strong, under the Stand Up to Racism banner to protest outside the Reform UK headquarters, and specifically against Nigel Farage, with many people here associating Reform UK and Mr Farage with some of the riots and violent disorder we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And in reaction to this protest, a Reform UK spokesperson has said that this office, the Victoria Street office, has been a postal address only for a number of years. This demonstration and the invasion of our offices in previous years by extremist left-wing campaigners has, for the security and health of our staff, meant that we have had to do this. They went on to say the head office is not in London, and you will understand why we are not going to reveal its whereabouts, given what they describe as the thuggery and aggression of the far left, whose only thought to democratic opposition is to bully and attempt to intimidate into silence. That is the Reform response to this gathering here, accusing them of being a far left group associated with thuggery and violence and the sort of intimidation that Reform has faced at its HQ in recent years. Now, there are all sorts of people gathering at this protest. It's quite a broad mix. Earlier I spoke to some people from the Turkish Marxist and Leninist Communist Party, and just to my left here, if I can take you with me, we've got representatives from the Marxist and Leninist Party of Germany, say MLPD on that banner there. Workers of all countries unite on a yellow banner to the right as well. A man I spoke to just there moments ago told me that they had travelled to London specifically for this event, thinking that they needed to gather anti-fascists internationally to target what they described as the rise of the far right in England. Well, I think many people in England will hear that and be quite disturbed that there are far-left activists travelling to Britain to protest against democratically elected politicians. But perhaps we'll hear some perspectives on your say later today in reaction to that. But it's a significant gathering here, and it comes as more demonstrations are occurring in Newcastle, in Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, and of course here in London, where people are standing outside the Reform UK headquarters, protesting against what they describe as inspiration for the violent disorder and rioting we've seen earlier. And during some of the speeches, I don't know if you can just about hear it in the distance, it's still ongoing, they were chanting Nazi scum off our streets, associating perhaps Reform UK with fascism and the far right. People I spoke to earlier in the crowd told me that they thought that while many people had been going through the legal system for inciting violence and whipping up violent disorder, they also thought that Mr Farage should also be held accountable for what they said were his roles in inspiring that disorder. Again, I imagine a claim, an accusation that Mr Farage would reject very severely. And beyond just the Turkish and German communists here, we've also got this flag here of a swastika, a Nazi symbol, and it's a sort of anti-fascist football symbol there. You see the England flag. On the other side of the flag is a man putting a swastika into a bin. Perhaps then again, protesters here associating Reform and Nigel Farage with Nazism. Very stern and strong political messaging here. I've also seen a flag for Saoirse Don Palestine, which is a Irish pro-Palestinian group, potentially another controversial far-left inclusion into this demonstration, because last week Saoirse Don Palestine held a demonstration in Dublin to mark the death of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas. Very controversial, obviously, for that to be going on, and they also were holding some flags of Hezbollah and Hamas at that demonstration. But here in central London, the target and the discussion is not what's going on in Israel and Palestine, but Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. That's what they're focusing on here. That's the message of the socialist workers here, and that's the message they're putting towards Reform UK.
All right, Charlie Peters, thank you very much. don't get it how that's not sort of seen as sort of intimidatory. I mean, that's truly protesting outside the political offices in that way and literally implying that everybody or anyone who voted for them is maybe a Nazi or some sort of fascist. It does seem a bit odd that they're allowed to be shouting such things, and that's OK. But joining me now in the studio is GBNews' political correspondent, Olivia Atley. Olivia, we were talking about the King. He is calling for unity. Do you think he should just... I mean, should he be really getting involved in this? Is this normal behaviour for a king to be involved in something like this? Or some people might want him to wind his neck in?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Is it normal behaviour? I mean, on the face of it, King Charles's comments are pretty innocuous, even banal. He says he congratulates and praises the emergency services and the police who pulled together. But then he also congratulates the communities who combated the racism on the streets. Well, what exactly does he mean by that? Because I think a lot of people reading that would think he means the counter-protesters who, as we've just heard from Charlie's report there, are quite controversial in themselves. There have been reports of Free Palestine being shouted, of phrases like from the river to the sea being shouted at these counter-protests. And, of course, there was the Labour councillor who's been suspended from his job for suggesting that the throats of far-right protesters should be cut. So is King Charles giving sort of credence to what these counter-protesters have been saying? I mean, I'm sure Buckingham Palace would say not, and that is probably pushing it a little bit too far. But it could be that the monarch's words are read like that, which does make you wonder, I mean, would his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, have waded into an event like this? And
just briefly, apologies for some of the language that you may have overheard in that live stream there. Obviously, it's live, it's beyond our control, and some of the images that you may have seen as well that you may have found offensive. So King Charles getting involved in this, I mean, you know, and he's talking about the communities. A lot of people might be looking at this and feeling that it's not allowing people who may be feeling somewhat disenfranchised due to the massive levels of immigration. They don't have a voice.
Well, that's sort of the point that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, was making in his very punchy Daily Mail column today. He was saying that, yes, of course, the rioters who've resorted to violence and intimidatory behaviour should be imprisoned, and that is what Keir Starmer is doing. But he makes the point that 34%, according to one poll, of Brits agree with, that have sympathy with the protesters' causes, if not with their means. So, i.e., 34% of the country think that it is a massive problem that immigration has reached, both legal and illegal immigration has reached an all-time high. Is Keir Starmer going to talk about that? Is he going to address it at all? Well, politically, that is very, very difficult for him. Because Labour has this absolutely enormous majority, it's quite a fragile coalition. You've got plenty of Labour voters who are perhaps your more classic left-wing Labour voters of the Jeremy Corbyn mindset, who think that even talking about getting a lid on immigration is sort of racist in itself. And then you have quite sort of people who voted Labour at the last election, who are actually quite conservative in their mindset, might have voted Conservative all their life before, but felt fed up with the Conservative government and thought they would give Labour a chance. Keir Starmer needs to keep both those constituents of people on side. And how is he going to do that? How is he going to toe the line on immigration? At the moment, it seems like he'd basically rather talk about anything else.
It does, because he was given a question with regard to it. He evaded it. He did not answer the question. He said he was focusing on communities and all of that sort of thing. But the bottom line is, people will still continue to feel disenfranchised. It'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer moves forward with it. Olivia Atley, thank you very much. Right. Well, I'm also now joined by former Sergeant Harry Tang. All right, Harry, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. Harry, look, some people are... The protest that we've just seen outside the Reform UK headquarters, I don't know whether you've been keeping track on that. Yeah. There were some things that were really probably not acceptable in terms of how they were protesting, in terms of the language that was being used at that protest. Yet they are supposedly the counter-peaceful protesters, and they're actually outside an HQ and implying that everybody or anyone who voted Reform is in some way sort of racist. Is this how we should go about our business these days? Because I'm worried about people who actually don't want to talk about the mass immigration in this country.
Yeah, I think they're just easy insults to give, aren't they? You're racist, far right. It's far right, left, right and centre. It's the narrative. It's the government. And then, of course, you've got the far right who are doing all these protests. No, they're just a bunch of yobs who would have found any excuse to have a go at policing. And it's great. I love the fact these photos are coming up and suddenly the impunity has gone. There's safety in numbers and these yobs are being locked up one by one. My concern, of course, is that they, by the left, the militant left in particular, are rubbing everyone up into the same group because it's easier and it means they can put their opposition in one neat pile. But what we've got here, I've just realised basically has come down to you're either your globalist in your left sort of thing who believe there should be a free-for-all and they're not worried about 750,000 immigration every year in this country of just 65, 67 million. It astounds me how they're not concerned about that. I'm astounded that they aren't worried at all by the change of what's happening in our streets with all these machete fights, and which is day after day now, these stabbings. They're not concerned. More the merrier. So it's really, really worrying that there are huge numbers of people such as myself who do not feel obliged to wander along to a protest and throw a wheelie bin at a police officer. Thank you very much. I think that's not helping at all, and it's nothing to do with the subject. But I am deeply concerned, and I tend to think those on the left probably live in slightly, shall we, leafy areas, probably have their own insurance for their medical care, or they have private insurance, and they don't have to worry about it yet because it doesn't directly affect them. And it's other people where it's directly affecting. But they don't, I think the correspondent said earlier, the Irish one, they've lost their political voice. There is nowhere to put it now. And they still can't refer to violence because they don't want to. I don't want to. But I think no one's listening, and I'm being named as far right. Thank you very much. I've been a police officer for 30 years, upholding the law, and I didn't get disciplined once, so, and I was on the front line on shifts. So, it's frustrating. And we got a huge divide in this country. Those who are patriots, in the true sense of the word, they're patriotic. Ironically, the King, who I looked after many times actually as a VIP protection officer, you probably find that the patriots want to keep the royal family. And yet, if we want to put it in a nice, easy package, the globalists think, what are they there for?
And I get what you're saying, and a lot of people will be hearing that. And as was pointed out, at least over 30% of the people agree with the sentiment that immigration needs to be dealt with. What will the police officers be told with regard to these protests? Because, I don't know whether you've been policed to protest before, but what kind of things will they be told to be doing and looking out for?
Yeah, I was level 2 public order and mutual aid and things like that as a pass as well. So they will be briefed. They will be told basically they have few resources to make arrests at that point. So you're only going to target those real specific troublemakers. And so, to be honest, if people are holding flags about, they're going to be very cautious about going to them, arresting them, taking them away, and then creating a disturbance at that point of where they haven't got the resources to back it up. Now, in an ideal world, that would happen because it's got to be seen to be done. And it's no good doing everything behind closed doors and no one hearing about it. Because then you get these accusations, and I don't know anymore whether there's this two-tier policing and this side of things. So it's really important to be seen to be fair. But I can also see those police officers who are very stretched, and they need muscle and brawn on the streets to stop those bricks through the shields, and they can't have two people going off with every prisoner at that point. So it's a real difficult predicament, and they've got to think ahead, of course. So I think it's probably the best way. I love the fact that they're publishing these 12 photographs, they're advertising that where these people have been put in prison. But it'd be lovely if that amount of effort from the government and judicial system could happen for knife crime on our streets. That would be good as well, wouldn't it?
Well, wouldn't it just? OK, well, listen, Harry, thank you very much. Really good to talk to you. That's Harry Tang. He's a former police sergeant